Avoiding technology and digital transformation failure is critical for any organization about to embark on a digital transformation. But what exactly is it that software vendors should do to ensure that they're avoiding failure and avoiding potential lawsuits? That's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And in our experience, we work with a lot of organizations that are going through digital transformations. Many of them have failed or are struggling with their transformations, and we help them get back on track as a result. And in those lessons and in those findings, we tend to publish and focus a lot on how to avoid failure and what organizations should do to avoid failure along the way. But what we haven't covered in this YouTube channel and other discussions is what can software vendors do to ensure that they're making their clients successful and that they're avoiding failure and they're ultimately avoiding lawsuits. One side note I'll make here is that we as an organization oftentimes provide expert witness services to lawsuits. And so when there is a lawsuit, either the plaintiff, who's the implementing organization, or the defendant, who's typically the software vendor or system integrator, will hire us to be an independent expert to testify on why the project failed. And so my goal here today is to share a video with you that will give you some tips on how to avoid ever needing to hire us for those services, especially if you're a software vendor. So if you're in the software vendor space, if you're a system integrator, a sales rep, a consultant, or whatever the case may be, this video is for you. The first thing you can do, and this is arguably the most important thing you can do as a vendor to ensure that your clients don't fail and that you and your organization ultimately don't fail in your clients' transformation journeys, is to ensure that you set realistic expectations. In our expert witness work and our project recovery work, we find that oftentimes unrealistic expectations was the root cause of a bunch of other stuff that went wrong in the project. For example, if an organization thinks that it's only going to take 12 months to implement your technology, but ultimately it's really going to take them 18 or 24 months, right there they have unrealistic expectations, and right there they're set up for failure because they're going to make a bunch of really bad decisions because they thought it was only going to take them 12 months to implement. So that's when they start cutting things like organizational change management, defining what our business processes are going to be, data migration, integration, all the things that are ultimately going to make the project successful suddenly become a casualty of the fact that there was unrealistic expectations, and now we've got to make up lost ground, or now we've got to realign our expectations to ensure that we can actually somewhat meet those expectations that were never realistic to begin with. So if there's one thing you can do to ensure that your clients are successful and that your organization avoids failures and lawsuits, is ensure that you set realistic expectations for your clients. And one thing I'll note here is I understand that as a sales rep, if you are a sales rep, it can be appealing, and there's a reason why you would want to downplay the time and cost and risk associated with an implementation, but just recognize that when you do that, if you do that, it ultimately is setting up your customer for failure. One important detail that often gets lost in the client software evaluation process is the vendor comes in, they demo the product, they show a certain version of the software or certain modules within the software. Client decides they like that software, they want to buy it, they get the contracts, but the contracts don't reflect what they were shown in the demos. And this is a very common dynamic that happens throughout the sales cycle often. So while you may have the best intentions of showing what products and what modules and what parts of the system you think are the best fit for your client, what oftentimes ends up happening is your procurement group or your contracts group ends up not having those right details in the contract. So you end up buying the wrong version of the software, or you don't have the modules you thought you were getting as a customer. So if there's one thing you can do along these lines, it's to make sure that you really stay actively involved in ensuring that what you showed your customers and what you demoed in the demo process reflects what you're actually giving them in the RFP response, as well as the ultimate contracts that they sign off on to deploy your technology. So as a software vendor that's trying to sell software and services to your customers, it's easy to focus on the strengths. All the things that your product does well, all the things your services group might do well, and you're not necessarily incentivized to spotlight or showcase the weaknesses, the things that your software does not do well, or the deficiencies on your delivery team. However, one of the most important things you can do to build trust is to acknowledge with your customers or your potential customers where your weaknesses are. And ultimately, the way I look at it as an agnostic consultant is that every software product out there, every provider, every system integrator, every consulting firm has weaknesses. So your competition has weaknesses, you have weaknesses, so you might as well get it out on the table and be that trusted advisor that's honest about where your product fits and where it doesn't. And ultimately, this is going to help you in two ways. One is you're going to build more trust during the sales cycle. Your customer is going to be more likely to buy from you simply because you were honest and they know you're telling the truth and they trust you more. But also, it's going to make it less likely that you have a misaligned solution for your customer. In other words, it might be better that if a customer doesn't like your weaknesses or can't live with those weaknesses, it might be better that they don't become a customer and that you go focus on customers that can live with it or value your solution more. Easier said than done when you have a commission check riding on a sale like that, but in general, that's one of the best things you can do is acknowledge the deficiencies or the weaknesses of your product or solution as part of the sales cycle. Another thing you can do to help build trust with your customers and ensure that your customers have realistic expectations and that they know where your weaknesses are and where your strengths are and have an objective view of how your product or solution might fit into those customer organizations is to leverage technology agnostic support. For example, a lot of software vendors and system integrators and technical consulting firms will hire our team at Third Stage to come in to be that objective advisor to help their customers through their journeys. So this can be a good way to build trust, to have some validation of whether or not your product is a good fit. It can also be a great way to ensure that the implementation goes well and that your customer and your team are looking at the things outside of just technology and deploying technologies. Things like integration between systems or deploying complementary technologies or deploying change management strategies, providing overall program management to ensure that your client is successful. Those are things that can be very instrumental and that are instrumental and crucial to ensuring that your customers are successful in their digital transformations. So think about using technology agnostic providers like our team at Third Stage to help augment your sales pursuit and ultimately to help ensure that your customers are successful in their implementations. And by the way, if you'd like to talk about how Third Stage can help you or your customers in those types of endeavors, feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. Now, the next thing on our list is a little bit more difficult to change, especially if you're not an executive within your organization. And that is to fix the overall compensation systems that drives a lot of the problems that come from the vendor community when it relates to digital transformation challenges and failures. So what I mean by this is most vendors and system integrators are incentivized heavily to sell software. And they receive a big check, typically upfront, when the sale is made. So if you have a multi-million-dollar software subscription at stake that you're about to sell to a potential customer, you're going to make a lot of money up front if you close that deal. It doesn't necessarily matter whether or not the organization or your customer deploys that technology effectively. What really matters in terms of your current compensation systems is whether or not you made the sale. So internal compensation systems are largely broken and create these perverse incentives to close a deal at all cost without considering how successful or what the impact of your solution is to your customers. So one thing that organizations in the technology space can do to solve this problem is to fix those compensation systems and to tie more compensation to your customer success rather than just selling them software. Now, at the end of the day, you may or may not be able to influence the things I've talked about so far in this video. There's only so much you can change within the organization you work for unless you're really high up in the organization. And so ultimately it may come down to you doing some self-exploration to determine whether or not you're really at the right company. Are you philosophically aligned with that organization? Are you ethically aligned with the organization? Do you feel like the organization you work for represents your customer's best interest and is doing the things that it needs to do to ensure that your customers are successful and that it's reducing some of these perverse incentives that I talked about that create so many failures in the industry? And if it turns out that you're not at the right place, it may be time to rethink where you are. Maybe it's time to look at other vendors. There are plenty of software vendors and solution providers in the marketplace. It may be that it's time to look for other options in your career journey. Difficult, of course, but that may be something that's worth thinking about, and that may be a last resort as you think about how can I ensure that I'm doing my part to ensure that my customers are successful and that I'm not just selling them a bill of goods as part of their digital transformations. So I hope this has given you some things to think about as you think about how can you as a vendor or a service provider provide better service to your customers and ultimately ensure that your customers are successful. I encourage you to reach out if you want to brainstorm ideas on how you might do a better job of that, or if you'd like to brainstorm ideas of how to make specific customers successful, or if you're having customers or clients that are struggling with their implementations, we'd be happy to help. So feel free to reach out. I've included my contact information below. along with a number of other industry resources that I encourage you to check out. So if you found this information useful, hope you have a great day.